So Naruto is a series with a lot of fights, to say the least. I think we can all agree on that. And throughout its runtime, and even well after the anime and manga concluded, there have been many fans of the community that will go back and forth about fights that we never saw and try to debate on who would win. These are, of course, the Naruto versus battles that we've all come to know and love, and sometimes hate. Many fans will go on either Reddit threads or TikTok or, of course, YouTube to bring their best arguments to the table to determine who will actually win in each versus battle. And just like with the Naruto series having numerous fights in its catalog, the number of versus battle videos that people have argued and debated over is just as extensive. But what are the versus battles that are the most debated and talked about? Well, that brings us to today's video. Today, I wanted to take a break from doing actual versus battle videos to do this fun little fourth wall break of a video and talk about what I feel are the top 5 most debated Naruto fights among the Naruto community. So a couple things before we get started. Be sure to remember that this is a topic that is mostly subjective, as in these are what I feel are the top 5 debated battles to me. I mean, like, obviously when it comes to some of these, there's going to be a little bit of objectivity, right? But as far as the rankings go, it's just how I feel that they are ranked. With that said, if you have a different ranking or just have different choices in particular on this topic, let me know in the comments what you think are the top 5 most debated Naruto fights. The second thing is, while I'll give the rankings of these fights, I won't give an answer off the top of my head who will win them until the end of the video. So I'll go back over each of these fights and say who I feel wins off the top of my head, and that will lead into an announcement at the end of the video, so stick around for that. And the last thing is, before I say what's number 1, I'll give a few honorable mentions in order to not take away some of the spotlight for the versus battles that didn't make the list. So with all that said, let's get into the video, starting with number 5. This one shouldn't be a surprise. Now, I will say that when it comes to number 5 and the ones I have as honorable mentions, that either one could be switched around. Like, they could be interchangeable, right? But how often I feel they're debated, I feel like they can just go either way. But I think this is what I want to put at number 5. But the other 4, I'm taking to the grave for sure. But yeah, Itachi versus Jiraiya is definitely one of the most interesting and yet frustrating versus battles to come across. Not so much the topic itself is frustrating, at least not for me, but I know a lot of people love both of these characters and typically seem to stand one side or the other. And ironically, it all comes from just 1 to 2 lines in the anime or manga, where Kisame tells Itachi that if they both were to fight Jiraiya, that they'd lose. And then Jiraiya confidently says later on in the hotel that he could eliminate them both at the same time. Now, while I do agree that in a 1v1, Itachi versus Jiraiya would be an interesting and fun match to both watch and debate over, given what we see from both Itachi and Kisame later on in Shippuden, it's kind of hard for me to believe that Jiraiya would actually beat the both of them. When it comes to Itachi versus Jiraiya in just a 1v1, then yeah, I'd say there's a little bit more wiggle room to say who would win or not. But yeah, when it comes to the rankings of which first battles are the most debated over, I think this one fits at number 5. Like I said, I could be wrong, but over the years, I've seen Itachi versus Jiraiya videos and Reddit threads all over the internet, and I think this one being at number 5 just makes the most sense. But again, the statements from Kisame and Jiraiya being taken into account, people are going to stand Jiraiya one way and stand Itachi the other. So I think number 5 makes sense. Yeah, this is another one that just makes sense for it to be one of the most debated fights in the Naruto community, and the same could be said for Edo Itachi versus Edo Nagato. Like, most times when you bring up Itachi versus Pain, Edo Itachi versus Edo Nagato follows suit. So we can say that for the sake of fairness that they're both in the same entry. Even more so when Itachi and Nagato are brought back in the war arc and we see how both of them would fight pretty much at full power and they just cut loose. People have often imagined how this fight could go, especially after Itachi drops that line to Nagato in the war arc where he says, "With my Mangekyo Sharingan and your Rinnegan, there's nothing we can't do." Another reason this fight makes sense to be here as to why it's such a hotly debated fight is that both Itachi and Pain are a part of the big 3 of the Akatsuki, like the big boys of the Akatsuki. So naturally, people want to argue and determine who would win in a fight between the two of them, with many people using both the sick versions of Itachi and healthy versions of Itachi against a weakened or full power Pain. There have been numerous videos done and Reddit threads posted about this topic, as well as Edo Itachi versus Edo Nagato. Many people will say that with the tools Itachi has at his disposal and his high superior intellect, he'll be able to eventually pick off each path of Pain one by one to take the win. Others will argue that with the crazy abilities of the Rinnegan, the shared field of vision, and the animal summons, Pain would just put too much pressure on Itachi, sick or not. Personally, this fight is very high difficulty for either fighter, but again, I won't mention that until the end of the video, so stick around. But yeah, this fight being a hot take among fans makes sense because both are very powerful fighters and some of the more favorites among the Akatsuki and the whole Naruto series as a whole. So I think number 4 is a fair placement for this. So at least in my experience, this fight took some time off for being a hot take of a fight. And I say that to mean that there was at one point, I felt like this fight was getting all kinds of attention, but recently in the past couple years, I haven't really seen a whole lot of people going back and forth on it. But regardless, I do remember that whenever I first got started into Naruto versus battle videos on YouTube, that this fight was one of the most fun, interesting, and yet controversial fights to discuss at length, and for good reason. Imagining how this fight would go down between these two ninja who have some of the trickiest movesets in the verse is so much fun. Like picturing how Minato would approach Pain in a 1v6 with how fast and slippery he is would go crazy. Conversely, imagining how Pain would combat and adapt to Minato's cat and mouse fighting style would be just as crazy. And just like with the Edo Nagato and Edo Itachi entry from earlier, the same case can be made for Edo Minato versus Edo Nagato. Like, typically when you start to discuss who would win between Minato and Pain, Edo Minato and Edo Nagato isn't too far behind. And like I said earlier, lately in the past couple years, I haven't seen this fight being talked about as much, so maybe you can move this fight from number 3 to number 4 or 5 instead, but I think number 3 is fair. But again, in my experience, at least when starting out as a Naruto YouTube content creator, I just remember this fight being almost everywhere. Like, you couldn't even escape this conversation. Whether it was on Facebook, YouTube, or Reddit, this fight was being talked about a lot. And it makes sense. Minato and Pain are both fan favorites, and it's always especially fun to try to picture how well Minato would do against all the Akatsuki members. In fact, I believe Virtue himself did a video on this exact topic, which was very well done, so go check that out later if you want to. But more than that, again, as I said before, it's just fun to come up with different ideas about how each of these fighters would deal with the other in order to take the win. And just to reiterate, at the end of the video, I will give an answer on who I feel wins this on top of my head, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, like I said, I understand if you feel like this fight may or may not be much of a hot take now, but I could be wrong. And maybe people still debate this consistently today. I just haven't seen as much demand for it as I had a couple years ago. Yeah, I don't think many people are going to be surprised on this one. I mean, like, of course, this fight was going to make the list. And for good reason. Again, you know, they're both Hokage, both incredibly smart and versatile, both are very powerful and super fast, and both have a lasting impact on the series as a whole. So naturally, people are going to compare these two and try to determine who comes out on top. Ironically, if I'm not mistaken, this may have actually started by people trying to decide who specifically was the faster between Tobirama and Minato. And then as the years went on, it just divulged into more of a death match between the two Hokage. This also may have stemmed from the fact that when it comes to verse battles and Naruto power scaling specifically, Tobirama is a very controversial character to discuss. Because on the one hand, when pitting Tobirama up against obviously strong and powerful opponents such as Itachi, Pain, and of course Minato, they'll have those who will immediately say Tobirama is fodder because he was killed by the Kinkaku Force. And conversely, you'll have those who back up Tobirama and say that he's extremely underrated given his feats and performance in the war arc against Yubito. So as you can imagine and have most likely seen, talking about Minato versus Tobirama can lead to some incredibly serious but interesting and admittedly entertaining discussion. But more to the point, the reason that this is number 2 to me is because this is one of the fights that still gets talked about heavily even to this day. And even when just talking about speed and nothing else, this competition still has so much attention that it's crazy. It also doesn't hurt that both are Hokage, and Hokage versus battles are always fun. So when it comes to this fight, I say it's also extremely high difficulty for either one. But again, to reiterate, I will give a an answer to who wins off the top of my head at the end of the video, so stick around. But yeah, this fight is definitely one of the most talked about that I've seen. Even to this day, I don't think I can really escape it. As soon as I get onto TikTok or see Reddit threads, it just pops up. So yeah, number 2 definitely makes sense to me. Like I said, I understand if you don't think it's number 2, but Minato and Tobirama, like, they just go back and forth between fans all the time. So like I said, before I get to number 1, I will list some honorable mentions to the fights that didn't make the list. Now with these, like I said at the beginning of the video, you could move these at number 5. I just think honorable mentions make the most sense by either they don't get talked about enough, where they don't get talked about as much as number 5, or the answers to them should be obvious, or both. So first honorable mention is War Kakashi versus Itachi. I mean, yeah, I had to have a Kakashi fight in this at some point. But recently, I know, being a Kakashi stan, I've brought this up a lot, especially in the past couple years, and especially the past few months. But I do think this fight is very back and forth between fans, because people are not taking War Kakashi as seriously, or people say that Itachi still slams just as bad as he did in part 1. So yeah, this one's very controversial to say the least. The next honorable mention is Itachi versus Obito, specifically the orange mask, mainly because they're both in the Akatsuki, and this one is talked about a lot, maybe not as much as Itachi versus Jiraiya, and who knows, maybe not as much as the other entries that I've seen. But I guess to me, this one isn't as talked about because most people do feel like the answer is kind of obvious with Obito winning. But a lot of people do bring up the manga panels of Obito saying that Itachi would kill him, or that it's safe to attack the village now because Itachi's dead, so we don't have to worry about that. So like, those 2 manga panels have started this whole debate in the first place. So I think that's why this fight is talked about just as much as some of the other entries, but not as much compared to them because the answer should be obvious. Next honorable mention is Guy versus Pain. And this one kind of stems from, you know, the joke that, you know, Kishimoto wrote Guy out of this arc pretty much to save Pain to fight Naruto and all that. Like, there was a reason why Guy wasn't in the village to fight Pain, this and that. This one can go back and forth a lot. It doesn't get talked about as much, but I do know that when it does get talked about, it's heavily debated, and it goes back and forth between people who sleep on Guy in the 7th gate, or to say that Pain just locks him up with Chubaku Tensei and GG. So is it not as much, but when it does get talked about, it gets heated for sure. Next honorable mention is Tobirama versus Pain. Like with the Minato versus Pain one, it's just as fun to think about how Tobirama would, you know, break down the abilities of each Rinnegan ability. And but again, with how fast Tobirama is, it's also just as fun to maybe think how he would combat Pain, and how Pain would adapt to his cat and mouse fighting style too, especially since Tobirama is physically stronger than Minato, at least to a certain extent. That it's just as fun. But I think Minato versus Pain specifically is a little bit more popular to discuss than Tobirama versus Pain, which is why it's an honorable mention here. And then the last honorable mention is Itachi versus Madara. I for the life of me, I don't understand why this one keeps getting brought up a lot. Like I said, it's not as talked about as the other entries, but just like with Itachi versus Obito, this one gets brought up, and when it does get brought up, it gets heated, because Itachi and Madara are some of the fan favorites of the series, like, by definition. So talking about this one, it can be fun, but I feel like the answers should be obvious for the most part. You can maybe give some wins to Itachi, but I think Madara beats him for the most part, because, I mean, trying to argue that Itachi beats Madara is, for the most part, almost like saying Itachi can beat Hashirama, and that's not, like, maybe like teenage Madara, you know, Itachi can get the win. But you know, for the most Madaras that we see, the most versions of Madara we see, Itachi does so. That's just my opinion. But alright, so finally we get to number 1, and no scripts, nothing, like, no holds barred. No one should be surprised by this one. It is Minato versus Itachi. This one is a war in the Naruto community. Like, the definition, if you go to the dictionary and look up the meaning of war, it says Minato versus Itachi. I guarantee you. So I'm not even kidding around. This fight gets talked about religiously. It is bad. Now, and then even from day one to now, like the second Minato probably popped onto the screen, people were already probably going back and forth on it, and it is still talked about to this day. Like, I could probably search it up right now and a conversation or an argument could have been talked about yesterday about it. It is crazy. And the funny thing is that it doesn't matter what you argue about. You could argue which one looks cooler, and it is still a death match between them. People will stand on Minato and stand on Itachi. It's crazy. It is absolutely crazy. And so this fight is legendary and infamous at the same time for being one of the most interesting fights to go over and one of the most controversial. And for good reason. Like both Minato and Itachi have similar aspects. Like they're both wise, skilled, very powerful, very intelligent, very, slippery. They just have multiple tools at their disposal that they could use to win the fight against one another. And so, obviously picturing a fight between them would be legendary, right? But again, it doesn't matter what you talk about. It could be who looks the coolest, who is smarter, who is actually stronger. And it just doesn't matter. You will go into a full-on war if you start talking about it. So I don't think anyone's going to be surprised with this being number one. But yes, definitely. I wish I can go into more detail, but I think I'm just going to sound redundant. Y'all should already know that Minato versus Itachi is number one. If there's any indication, I did a voting poll a long time ago about who is cooler, maybe. I think it was. Or who's your favorite between these two. And it was 50-50, dead even. Maybe 49 and 51. But again, for the most part, it was 50-50. So if that's any indication, yeah, it's definitely number one. So at the beginning of the video, and as I've repeated over and over, I will say who I feel wins at each of these versus battle videos just off the top of my head. And I'll say why I'm not going into too much detail about it in a second. But when it comes to Jiraiya versus Itachi, I think Itachi wins more often than not. When it comes to Itachi versus Pain, I think Pain wins more often than not. Very high difficulty. When it comes to number 3, Minato versus Pain, I think Minato takes the edge. Very high difficulty, extreme high difficulty. And when it comes to number 2, Minato versus Tobirama, I also think Minato wins. Again, very high difficulty. And when it comes to number 1, Minato, I think, wins this one. And now the thing is, I've done, videos on some of these before, and this will lead into my announcement. I am going to be going over these videos that I have done in the past. Again, I've done some of these, if not all these, and even some of the honorable mentions. But even if I haven't, I am going to be doing those. But I want to go back over the videos that I have done, like Minato versus Itachi, Minato versus Tobirama, Pain versus Minato, etc., etc. And doing a Was I Wrong or Right series. TLDR, it'll just be me going back over those videos, redoing them to see if I was wrong or if I felt my initial conclusion was correct. So let me know in the comments which video you would like to see me redo first, and let me know in the comments again, what do you think are the top 5 most debated Naruto fights in the community? No holds barred, just let it rip. If you have a problem with my ranking, or if you have a different ranking that you would choose, let me know in the comments also. But if you haven't yet, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you have already. Click the bell for more notifications. Thank you all for watching. Hope you have a great day. Until my next one, like you snow.